Hello everybody, my name is Gorges from ASL Basics, and today I'm going to be showing you an interview I conducted with Sandi Herrin. You might actually know her as It's a Sign Life, and she's actually been involved with the deaf community for over 35 years. She started out as a student learning the language, became an interpreter, started to teach ASL as a professor, and now she's actually working alongside Dr. Kurt Radford, who is a deaf professor and actually during the summer times does curriculum development for Gallaudet University. So I'm really excited to show this interview to all of you today. And in this interview, we actually cover a lot of ground. So if you're just somebody that is learning sign language for the first time, maybe you're a hearing parent with a deaf child, maybe you're somebody that is thinking about making interpreting a career, or maybe you're already an interpreter and you're trying to get your certification. This interview covers all of those different things. So I really encourage everybody to go ahead and watch the interview from beginning to end, because it really will give you a nice wide perspective on the deaf community as a whole. And I encourage you to watch it all the way through, because towards the end of that interview, Sandi talks about specific advice for the hearing parents that have deaf children, and she also talks a little bit about her nonprofit organization and how they offer free classes for those parents with deaf children. And if this is something that you find value in, please leave a like and subscribe. And you can also click that little bell notification. That way, anytime we come out with new content, whether it's a lesson or an interview, you'll receive a notification so you don't miss a thing. So without any further ado, here's the interview. So the first question I have for you, Sandi, is how did you learn sign language?
Well, I'm actually going to go to the very beginning. When I was a child, I had a friend who was deaf. I was in probably first grade kindergarten, and her name was Toyanne.
Mm-hmm.
And we played all summer long, and my mom asked me how we communicated, and to this day I really don't know, because she didn't sign.
Mm-hmm.
For my birthday, she gave me a book by Helen Keller, and in the back of that book was the ABCs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was practicing my ABCs in church all the time. When I sit in church, I just, I'm bored listening to the sermon, so I'm doing the ABCs. And when I got older, I wanted to be able to do some missionary service. And so one of my leaders in my church saw me doing fingerspelling from my old Helen Keller book, mm-hmm. and recommended me for a mission to the deaf. So I went on a mission to the deaf when I was 21. My partner, or we call them companions, she was deaf. And that is how I learned. I just pretty much went in, and I was immersed into it. And the deaf community in San Diego really took me under their wing, and we volunteered at Deaf Community Services in San Diego, at the San Diego Hospital, Carlsbad School District. We helped there in classes, and so Mesa College, we helped assist in teaching classes there. And so, yeah, that's how I got my start. I pretty much just got thrown into the deep end of the pool, and in order to communicate with my partner, I had to be able to sign. And the best trial of my abilities was when she left, and I got a new partner who was hearing. And it was all on me to communicate with all my deaf friends. So that's where my learning curve went, woo! I really learned the most that way.
That's great. That's the fastest way to learn to swim, right?
Yep.
Throw yourself into the deep end. It's funny that you mentioned that what ended up getting you originally into sign language is the sign language alphabet. And it's funny, I hear that story over and over again. The more interpreters I meet, and the more people that are just hearing ones that have learned sign language later in life, it was almost like that gateway thing to where, oh, that alphabet is really interesting. And then it just kind of sparks this interest, and it's interesting the road that leads people down.
Yeah. Yep, I do. And I do think that it kind of just, it captures you. And once you learn that ABC, even if you're small, your eye will always go to, oh my gosh, you're doing sign language. Oh, I wish I could learn that.
One question I get a lot from people is, how long did it take me to learn sign language? And, that is different for everybody. And I'm just curious, how long did it feel for you to not necessarily be fluent, but to be proficient and comfortable with using sign language to communicate?
Well, I do have to say this, and I didn't mention this sooner, but I did actually go to a training center for 2 months where I was learning 24/7 American Sign Language. So that was a nice launching point for me, having only the alphabet under my belt. But from the time I actually feel like when I actually went to San Diego, it really did take me a good year. And we're talking, this is what I was doing 24/7. This was my life. It wasn't just a hobby. It wasn't just, I'm going to go to a couple of deaf groups once a month. I was every day interacting. And it took me a year. And that's about when I had to be dependent on my own ability to communicate and not on my partner's. And so I would say at that point, a year. And again, total immersion, 24/7. I didn't go home to anybody who didn't sign. We'd go home at night, and I'm still signing because my partner was deaf, right? So
Right.
that was, that was a year like that. So I don't know if everybody's the same, but that was me.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you do research about like sign language fluency or just really fluency in any language, you see different statistics. And if you know 10,000 words, you're fluent. If you know 20,000 words, you're fluent. And really, what I try to tell people is, don't focus so much on the word count, but focus on your ability to communicate. And I was watching this TED Talk by a linguistic from New Zealand, and he was talking about how you can become fluent in 6 months. But really, he was talking about everyday conversation fluency, to where if you know anywhere between 1,000 or 3,000 words, then you're going to be right up to there to know just about as much as you need to for just casual everyday conversation. But yeah, my experience is actually parallels really close to what you mentioned, to where even with a year of full immersion and really having not much choice but to learn, it took me about a solid year as well to at least feel fluent, and not so much to where I'm struggling trying to pull up signs that I learned from months before, and to just be able to have that casual conversation and to feel that competency.
Right. And I do feel like if I had not been completely immersed in it, it would be like any other language where it can take 3 to 4 years to develop, because I have taken French in college and I've done it, 2 semesters, and I remember maybe 2 sentences from it because I wasn't using it constantly and integrating it into my life. Because one of the things that really allowed me to take that language and integrate it into my life was that I was immersed in the culture as well. So when you understand the culture and you're immersed in the culture, and you are part, as far as a hearing person can be, of that culture, you're let in for a period of time, you have an opportunity to learn exponentially from that because of the acclimation into the culture, which is a big part of really learning sign language. In fact, funny story, and this is not a brag at all, because I've never had this since, because I have not been as immersed as I was, but I actually got transferred to Virginia, and we became friends with the principal of a deaf school there. And when I finally left service, we had a little party, and I told him, he goes, "What are you looking forward to the most when you get home?" And I said, "Oh, all the new all the new songs on the radio. I can't wait to listen to them." He goes, "Do they have captions for radios?" I'm like, "Well, no, I'm just going to listen to the radio." And he says, "How are you going to do that?" So he thought I was deaf. This whole time I was there, we were friends for 7 months. And that is because I just was so immersed in the culture. I don't think it ever came up. And it has not, I think that has a littler to do with my signing skill as it does to my ability and desire to just be immersed in the culture and just be part of their group and friends and sincere and genuine with that. And so it didn't even occur to anybody to say, "Are you hearing or deaf?" Because it was just, I was so connected with what their culture was and what we were doing together as, friends.
Yeah, and I think that makes a huge difference when you are involved and integrated into that community, to where, it's one thing to take sign language in a college course or to learn it on like an academic level, or maybe even, watching videos online, just trying your best. But really, it's that about the culture and that immersion and that support. And when you're just really a part of that community and you're really involved, not only are you going to learn the language much better, but like you mentioned, you're going to be a part of that culture. And, you won't be so much of an outsider trying to come in. You are part of that community, and the deaf really will accept you for that.
Yeah, that's kind of when I think good things happen for anybody. Whatever you're trying to do is when you can make those genuine connections with people.
Yes.
That's when the real magic happens, I think.
So one of the things that I try to cover, because learning the language is tough, there's no way around it. I think many of us, if we're just learning sign language, or maybe we've tried to learn French or Spanish or Vietnamese or whatever language, it's a very difficult thing, and it can be really fun at first, but then eventually most of us will find like these plateaus, or we are presented with different challenges. So I was just curious, like, what kind of challenges did you come across, and how were you able to overcome them?
Plateaus definitely happen for me because you get in the habit, especially when it comes to receptive language for me. You get in a habit of accepting the least amount of information to get by. So, especially when it comes to receptive language, I heard just enough to get by, which limits your quality of conversation, right? And so I got to a point where I realized I was accepting only the limited amount of information to get by because I had a partner who was deaf who could kind of fill in the gaps for me. It was when I was left on my own to completely communicate with people who, up until now, I fooled in thinking I could really communicate with them at this level, and I was really only down here.
Mm-hmm.
I had to actually really push. It was a big push for me to be able to understand what they were saying, because I wasn't constantly looking at my partner going, is that right? Did I get that right? Do I understand what they're saying? I had to actually depend on myself. When that happened and my receptive language improved, my expressive language improved alongside of it, which I didn't even really know I needed. But suddenly I'm signing more naturally and fluidly as the thoughts came to me, and not word. It was more conversational and more smooth. But it really took me improving my receptive language to be able to do that. And I know that sounds kind of backwards, but I think the more that we really truly can understand and not just kind of skim by, but the depth of that conversation. So I don't know, and I'm going to go into this, but I talk a lot about conceptual signing when I'm teaching. So the idea is to get the concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea is to communicate. Sometimes you might not know every single word. What's really awesome about sign language is it's magical when that conceptual experience happens, because I still remember a gal who was incredibly intelligent. She was telling the story of seeing an old boyfriend, and she almost didn't recognize him because he had a mohawk, and that she realized she still kind of had little heart palpitations about him. And the way she did that was she went like this. She turned around, she went, this is the mohawk. This is, oh, I still love you. And that's a very simple sign, but the concept was so in depth. I walked in, I saw him, my hair stood on end like a mohawk, and I just realized I loved him. And it was the funniest moment. I'll never forget it. That happened. Really, this is a moment 35 years ago in a random conversation. But to me, I loved it because I understood exactly what she was saying. I didn't try to go, I love you on the head means this. No, I was enough immersed in what she was saying that I understood it at a different level. And pretty soon I'm able to come back to her with a higher level of conversation expressively, because I was really in the know. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's funny how big of an impact that can have, like when you reach these different milestones. And sometimes it feels like you're stuck on a plateau, or it feels like you're not making progress, but then like you have this epiphany, like you just reach this certain milestone and you have this conversation, or you understand the sign that you mentioned. And just like when you break through that plateau, it's really an unforgettable moment. And so like for anyone that's currently feeling like they're in a plateau, my advice would just be to keep going. Because eventually you're going to break through, and when you do, it's going to be like this unforgettable moment, and it'll be so encouraging that it'll give you the energy to keep going and the motivation to do so.
Right, and you may or may not have memory of what that moment was for you, but I promise you that almost every interpreter that I have trained remembers that moment.
Mm-hmm.
It is pivotal, and it happens multiple times for some, depending on how, far you're going and what you're doing. But yeah, it's a pivotal moment, and it happens. So just keep plugging away, and it reminds me of being breaking through a wall, that you're like, I'm right here, I got to the wall, I ran the race, I'm right at this wall. And you just have to punch through, and then there's a whole new level. And we kind of continually break through those things. And I know people that get stressed out about licensing and certifications that happen.
Right.
Those things to me are different moments. Okay, tests are tests.
Yeah.
And tests, some people test well, some people don't, but it doesn't mean you're not a great signer or a great conversationalist or incredibly skilled. Testing is completely different for licensing, a completely different animal as far as your skills go. So if that is something that you're struggling with, you've taken a test, you can't quite pass it, keep through and plugging through like you would any other licensing, because it is the test that sucks.
Yeah.
It's not you.
Yeah, and if you ask anyone that's taken those examinations, that that is by no means a direct reflection upon your skills. And like, if you start going to some of these workshops, we've gone to a few workshops by Jonathan Silva, and he's just an incredible interpreter signer. He grew up as a coda, and he can take that test and purposely get a 3.0, 4.0, a 5.0 on all the different levels, and just really incredible. But then he mentions how, I've seen so many people that are excellent interpreters and excellent signers that cannot pass that test. And on the flip side, I've seen some pretty terrible interpreters and some people that don't have the language abilities pass those examinations.
Sure.
So yeah, like you said, if you get your results back from one of those certifications and it says, you're not good enough, or it's not the score you were hoping for, don't be discouraged by that, because, like you mentioned, it's so much more important that you're involved in the community, the people that you're trying to communicate with you understand you, and that you're able to, do that job of facilitating that communication.
Right.
So speaking of interpreting, initially, how did you fall into the field of interpreting? Or is it something that you knew that you wanted from a young age, or is it something that this kind of sprung up later in life?
I might not even really think about interpreting until I went and had a companion who needed an interpreter. I didn't even know that was a thing. I mean, I saw people talk to each other, but I didn't realize that the gal standing next to somebody at the Dairy Queen was actually speaking for her and then signing and interpreting. I didn't understand that concept at all until I went into the language training center, and learned how that works. And we would practice interpreting. And then, of course, when I go to California, I am her person and her full-time interpreter. So we get there, and I have a 7-hour conference, and I've never interpreted except for maybe once or twice in the 2 months I was learning as a beginner. Mm-hmm. So interpreting was not a natural, not something on my radar, but it did come really natural to me. Understanding concepts and taking them and interpreting them, and understanding that I don't have to get word. That just was really natural for me for some reason. I don't know if it's because I had to do it from the very beginning of my learning of sign language. So I learned to interpret as I learned to sign, which is unusual. Usually you take class ASL 1, all through intermediate, ASL 2, ASL 3, and then you go into interpreting courses. And I was at ASL 1 and I was interpreting out of necessity, right? Mm-hmm. And I had a very patient teacher. So when I was done with my missionary service and I went back and got licensed, certified, there was no licensing at the time, it was just certification. I did get asked in my interview question, how often will you be available to interpret? And I'm like, whenever I want to. Oh, no, you need to be available all the time. Well, that's great in concept, but I also had to, work, and I was going to school. And so for me, in my early times of signing, I was mostly by invitation. I was out seeking interpreting jobs, right? If there was somebody who needed it, I'd call and run and help. But I was in school and doing other things. When I moved and started a family, I interpreted in college as my husband was going through college. It was great. I interpreted in classrooms. But the best thing I ever did was I started with a company here in Idaho Falls years ago that was, I was a contract worker, and they would set up appointments for us in the community with the police department, with the courts, with medical offices. And there was quite a good group of deaf people in here who needed that service. So I went that route for a long time. And then I started getting more into social work and working with kids with disabilities, and I was pulled in that direction. And so it's interesting. You never know. Am I going to be that interpreter 24/7, or all day long, where I'm just signing and interpreting, boom, 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 boom? Or you know what? There's other aspects to what we do besides just sitting maybe in a classroom or in a courtroom interpreting. I found my bliss helping people with individuals with disabilities. So that's kind of where I turned. And while I continued to interpret for the college, for courses there, I became less and less of a presence in the community and let other people kind of take some of those roles. And so, does it make sense? And so that's what's great about sign language, is the opportunities are really broader than you might think. It's not just interpreting, there's a lot of need out there in the social services. So.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, myself, I was pretty blown away just how wide of a spectrum interpreting is.
Yeah.
It wasn't until that we started working for an agency when we moved to Central California, because previously both my wife and I was interpreting for a college. And then we moved to the Central Valley and we started working for an agency, and all of a sudden we found ourselves in hospitals and physical therapy and other therapists, and like we're being used in all these different ways, even for like plays. We're interpreting Phantom of the Opera, we're interpreting for elementary and middle and high school and college, and it's really incredible. Just anywhere a person goes, like a deaf individual goes, if they're going to be interacting with a hearing person, they're going to need an interpreter. And so it's an interesting field of work where you really you become, it's a much more personal field of work, where it's not necessarily you're providing a service, but in many cases you're becoming a teacher to a student, or you're becoming a friend to a client. And you can become this really intimate line of work, and especially when you start going into the social services, where it can be more than just a job, but it can be something that is really genuinely fulfilling.
And it's interesting to me because especially in a small town where understanding that we have a code of ethics, I think they might call them something different now, but when I was back in the day, that's what we call them, and the things that you really had to adhere to for your own safety, for your client's personal safety. But there were moments where my social work crossed over with interpreting. For example, if I was called on a medical emergency, or if I was called on a 911 drunk and disorderly, these are people I know that I've interpreted for. And so I've developed a relationship of trust, yet I'm coming into a highly stressful situation with them. And in a way, having them know me has actually helped to diffuse situations that could be potentially violent and volatile, because they have trust. And I would just encourage you to continue to keep that trust. And one of the ways you do that, I'm going to give you an example, because this person is no longer with us and it was years ago, but I was actually brought in with the police department to somebody who had assaulted someone, and they literally, this is small town folks, the police went behind me and said, "You go in, we'll cover you." All right, well, I'm not going to do it your way. So I just kind of put my hand in the door and I'm going, "Are you all right? Are you all right? Are you okay? It's Sandy," and I'm signing in, and this person recognized my voice, even though they can see my face. They recognized me, opened the door calmly, went with the officers in a potentially volatile situation. Now, my job as an interpreter at that point is to not talk about that again with him unless he brings it up. Not to say, "Oh yeah, you did this and you were naughty and blah, 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 blah." My job is to have respect for what happens that are with folks that are very personal, or sometimes you have to cross into that area that's more social work than interpreting. Does that make sense? Because I would not have come out the door had I not said, "Come on, trust me." Because he doesn't trust the guys behind me, but he's coming because he sees me. Does that make sense?
And it's funny because it's something that you would never think of when, like, if you're a student in college and you're taking ASL 1, 2, and 3, and you're taking interpreting in the classroom. That's not, that kind of situation is probably the furthest thing away from your mind. But it's good to think about, and it's especially even better to study like what those code of ethics are and what those boundaries are. Because if you just go in there and wing it, or you just do your best, or you just assume, you could really find yourself in heat and high water really quick, because those are lines you don't want to cross, and it's
and then people like go in like, oh, he knows me. I've got this. You guys are fine. I've got this. Well, I don't. It's a dangerous situation. I'm not called to come in and solve the situation. I'm called to get him to understand that there are police out here that need to speak with him. Right? That's my job, and it wasn't necessarily I'm going to fix everything. And sometimes it's hard to step back and go, yes, they know me, they have trust in me, but what are my boundaries, and what is really, what is my job here in this situation?
Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty exciting story as far as interpreting. So just to kind of go back a step, because you have decades worth of experience in interpreting, so I'd really like to hear what you have to say about those that are just coming into the field, or maybe those that are wanting to become interpreters. What would be your advice for them just getting started?
I'd say be really, really well-rounded. Listen to everybody, because one of the things that I found when I was first starting out is, oh, that's not how I learned it. Oh, that's not how I sign it. That's not how I do it. Well, I've been from Virginia to Washington, D.C., Georgia, Idaho, Utah, California. And believe me, there are signs that are different everywhere. In fact, it was so funny with Halloween, because we sign Halloween like this, but everybody's doing this. I'm like, what's that? Be open to it, right? And so as an interpreter, if your client has a certain need, just meet that need there. Don't put the pride aside, and meet that need. Also, the language is evolving constantly. I took a little bit of hiatus from when I was doing all of the community work, went back to the community college, and suddenly they've got internet classes, and there's all these new words. What's the sign for internet? What's the sign for download? What's the sign for, the web? I don't know any of this stuff. So constantly be diligent and learning, and don't think that just because you've learned sign language doesn't mean you don't have to continue to be immersed in that deaf community, and know the people that you're serving. You might be of the mind, oh my gosh, I've been at school all week long. The last thing I want to do is go associate with people that I work for. You know what? Make it a goal once a month to go to a bowling event, or to go support somebody's spaghetti dinner for a fundraiser. Be that person that will go in and show up every once in a while to keep those ties, because you will be better for it, because as the language evolves, you'll be in the know, because it's constantly evolving. And the last thing you want when you face a new student or a new client is for them to, one, not be able to understand you. That's the worst. And they're, you know what? It's fine that way, but better connections are when you actually are speaking closer to their language. Yeah. And I always look at the age of the person I'm signing with. I have an idea that if they're, my age, that it's going to be a little bit different than if they're, in high school.
Absolutely.
And being able to be flexible with that and let go of some of that pride that says, this is how I learned it. I'm going to do it exactly like this. You know what? Continually be a student. Always be a student of the language.
That's some of the best advice I've heard in a long time. I've been preaching the same thing too, and it's interesting when I started doing this online. I have met a lot of people where I'll show somebody how to sign something, and usually I'll try to include 2 or 3 different ways, because there are regional signs. But it's funny because, like, oh well, I wasn't taught that way. Well, that's great and all, but it's good to have that wide spectrum and to be able to know, what is the way it's signed in your community? What's the way it's signed on a more country level? If you were to, now that I'm doing things online, like I'm having to learn all these different regional signs. And I remember you did a post about Walmart the other day.
Yeah, Walmart.
And you got some people saying, oh, well, that's not how I sign it here. I'm like, well, even here in California, like in Central California, we have 3-4 different signs for Walmart. It's just a matter of, who are you speaking to, what demographic are they in, how old are they, how young are they,
Right.
and it's just so many different ways to sign something. And it's like you mentioned, it's so important to always be a student, always to be an open mind. And even if, like, here's another example for pizza. So, pizza is the double Z sign. But when we moved to Central California, absolutely nobody, interpreters, deaf, anybody signs it that way. They all sign it like this.
Really?
Like you're holding a slice of pizza and you're going to eat it. I've tried to look that up on the internet, and I can't even find it on the internet. It's just one of those obscure signs that is really regionalized here. And if I go around saying, oh, well, the internet says pizza's like this, or I learned pizza like this, everybody else in the country is signing pizza like this, who cares?
Who cares?
That's not the sign that they use to communicate. And at the end of the day, it's about communication. It's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's
exactly.
You understand me.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's funny because at first when I was young, I didn't know how to handle that as a teacher. I learned it like this, I learned it like that. And so I just learned really quickly, well, for purposes of this classroom, that is so cool. Thank you for sharing. That is so cool. I never knew that. For purposes of this classroom, let's stick to this sign. Yeah, and just so that we can learn.
Right.
And then, integrate things that way. But sometimes it gets tough to navigate all the voices that say, do it this way, do it that way, do it that way. Finally, I just started saying, who cares? That's great. Show me what you got. That's where the idea of conceptual signing came to me, where I'm like, you want to get the concept. You want to be able to understand the feel of what's being said, the emotion of what's being said, the physical signs that are being spoken, like your voice would be, and the meaning and intent behind it. And that's really what matters the most, and when we get hung up on.
Right.
Like here in Idaho, we say crick, and other people say creek.
Right.
And so am I going to get hung up on that? I still know what you're talking about, right?
Just another quick anecdote is my brother had a brother-in-law who came from Thailand. He's deaf and he knew Thai sign language, and he came over and he moved to the United States, and we were all in the same sign language congregation, and so there was another deaf woman there that came from Europe, and she knew 3 different sign languages, and she knew 3 different verbal languages. And it's incredible to see and watch deaf ones from other countries not even know the same sign language get their point across.
Yes.
It's so amazing to me, like because you read about it too. Like I'm taking this linguistics class right now, and there's an entire section about sign language and how deaf individuals are just so much better at communicating and getting their point across when they don't share a language.
Yeah.
And really, at the end of the day, I can speak one sign language and you speak an entirely different sign language. But if the effort is there and the want to get your point across is there, you can make it happen. And it's amazing that that happens all the time, and it is something that we're capable of, not to just get hung up on this is the way I sign it, this is the way you sign it.
Isn't that true? There was a deaf couple from Greece, and they would travel all over Europe. I met them in Georgia, and they would talk about traveling all over Europe. And I said, boy, that must be difficult. Oh, no. Deaf people actually travel much better than hearing people. We get whatever we want because we understand each other much better. And so I'd heard that concept as well, right, from the deaf person saying, oh, yeah, we can go wherever we want. And I'm thinking, I'm going to take a deaf person to Europe with me.
Right.
Because we can get along just fine. But it is amazing how that does kind of transcend, and it is because there's just this overwhelming openness to just getting the concept and understanding and communicating rather than being held up on the semantics of the actual grammar and syntax of that language. And sometimes
Absolutely.
you get a little snobby.
And I liked also you touched a little bit about the evolution of sign language, and I myself have only been in it for a little over 10 years, and even in those 10 years it's evolved so much. And especially when you speak with older ones from the deaf community, those that are in their 60s and 70s, if you're not familiar with like C sign or pigeon sign, some of those older sign languages that were really drilled into them in hearing schools, like you'd be lost. And it's almost like you have to learn these separate languages. So I was watching this video, and the whole piece was about deaf scientists that are like going into undergraduate studies, and those that are becoming like physicists and microbiologists, and like these deaf individuals that are really highly educated, and they get into this field where there's no sign language that exists yet for like some of the terminology. And so they were interviewing this deaf scientist about like microbiological terms. And so he's sitting there and you're like, well, we get together and we have to invent signs, because I'm not going to sit there and finger spell metastasis or these really huge long vocabulary words. And he's like, how irritating would it be for you to have to go spell onomatopoeia one letter at a time, or any long vocabulary word just to it's such an arduous thing. And it's really cool to see that evolution of language happen, before your eyes. It's such a new language. ASL is really only 150 years old.
Yeah.
And like you said, when the internet came around, well, we need to invent signs for the internet. Now social media is around. We have to invent signs for social media, and now we have, this evolution of like all the STEM fields. Science and engineering and technology. English is evolving, but sign language is evolving with it, and oftentimes even at a faster pace.
Right, and one of the things too that's happening is, well, with the internet, back when I was working in San Diego, they had the relay service. We called it relay like this. That was actually the TTY, where we would type and talk. There was none of the video, none of this going on. Okay, and so this whole ability to get information like nobody's business. I believe that the level of exposure to just life experiences for a deaf person has, quadrupled by so much, because they can get online and they can now have all the same information that we have. It's not a struggle as much because they're not depending on an interpreter. They can get on most everything. You can get captions on. There's so much information now. So that level of knowledge and experience, life experience, is increasing, which means that, yeah, they are demanding that there are signs tied to some of these words that before were not part of their life, or part of their experience, and now they are. And so that is this machine right here in front of us is a big part of that evolution.
Absolutely.
So it's very cool. So if you interpret it in a college situation with young college kids, you'll probably see that growth more, because that's where I saw it happening, was when I interpreted in college. It's crazy, just the conversational changes and the idioms that are used, and the even some of the structure is less structured and more freestyle and free flowing in that everyday conversation. But yet it's still probably there, but it's just changing subtly enough, that I'm going, wow, this is incredibly high level linguistical communication, rather than, I remember being in San Diego and actually going to a study at the Salk Institute when they were first experimenting with light nodes on hands of people. So they would get, because my partner was involved in that study. She was a deaf person with all hearing family members. There was no first, second, third generation deaf people in her family. So they wanted to know how her signing differentiated from somebody who was maybe a second generation, or maybe a coda, or maybe, so they did all kinds of different tests. And from what they've learned linguistically about American Sign Language then to what they're learning now, and that evolution of the language is incredible because of technology and what they can learn from that technology, but also as they understand this incredibly potential blossoming of a new language. Because we have words for things, and there's not always signs for things, like you said. And so the potential for a big, huge, major blossoming of this language is just right around the corner, and inevitable.
Just to maybe bring things to a close, what would be the one thing that you would want to address with somebody that is learning the language for the first time? And then also, what would your advice be for an interpreter, or somebody that wants to be an interpreter?
So I'm going to kind of take that into learning a language is to somebody who is probably a parent of a child who is deaf, and then I'll address maybe what an interpreter is learning, and starting out with that goal in mind. But if you are a parent of a child who has some language delays, speech delays, who has some hearing issues, whatever the reason, whatever comes with that, whether it is accompanied by other delays or whether it is not, the time is now to start. There's no reason to wait to start learning yourself. Your child will learn sign language without you. And for me as a mother, I feel like I was the one that taught my child language, right? From the very beginning. Oh, baby. Oh, there's your mama. Oh, you're such a pretty baby. Okay, that kind of babbling that we do, they learn from me. Take it upon yourself to be that person that communicates with your baby first, and not a school teacher, not a preschool teacher, not a speech therapist. Be that person that your baby knows. My first words came from my mother, from my parents. Learn alongside them. Stay 1 or 2 steps ahead, because as a hearing parent, okay, we with our hearing children, we do. Okay, we've mastered a language and we are teaching them a language. So your job is to master that language. Right. If you think you want to learn alongside your child, you need to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of your child, so that when they hit those milestones, you're prepared. The other thing is they're going to hit them fast. The minute you can open that gateway of communication, it is a Helen Keller effect completely. That light goes on, and those children understand that when I say something, I'm going to get something in return. And isn't that the point of communication, right? I want something. I'm going to try to let you know what it is that I want, need. And that's kind of the whole point. So for those parents that are dealing with children with any need for language development, start now. Okay, and I'm coming from my own experience with that, with my own children and with children that I've foster cared. Okay, then your second job is to open their world up to others who will communicate with them as well. Everywhere you go in the store, you teach that clerk how to say, "Hi, Susie. You have a happy day." That is your job. Yeah. You teach those within their sphere of influence that they're interacting with every day. This is my child. Say something to them. Okay? That's what I would say to you. And with all the love in my heart, because that is meaningful. Those connections are really important, those social connections. For an interpreter, we need you so badly. Mm-hmm. So if you are even thinking, this might be the thing for me, start now. It's so much easier if you start high school, take some classes. Middle school, take some classes. Okay, they're offered all over the community adult continuing ed classes. If you're an adult and you think, I've always wanted to do it, well then get up off the couch and do it. Okay? Instead of just saying, oh, such a beautiful language, I've always wanted to learn, go learn. Take an adult continuing ed class. Okay, but if your focus is to interpret, we need you. It is becoming a crisis of large proportions, especially in our rural communities. We have people who do not have interpreters, who go to medical appointments very unsure about what their complete health status is, unsure whether or not they can communicate it properly to the doctor their needs medically, right? Or understanding what their treatment plan is. Those are important things, right? So we need you. So start now. Take those classes that you need to get to the point so that when you get into college, you can get into the program. Prepare yourself. Find out what it is that you need to know before you get to college, because there are requirements and levels of signing expectation that you have to meet before you start the program. And if you get there and you're not prepared, you may get discouraged and not continue. You want to continue. And believe me, it's a great way. And we're going to talk about the income portion of it, because you are a tool. You are an employee. You are a worker bee, okay? And you deserve to be reimbursed for that, okay? So go to college and get that skill And you'll find how many doors open in so many different ways because you know sign language that is a viable livelihood for you. And not only that, and then I'm going to the volunteer part of me, and my volunteer heart says, and then it's just a good thing to do.
Yes.
You know, it's just a good thing to do. So if you've got that heart of a giver, an empathetic, loving, kind, giving, social worker type of heart, this is the field for you. Plus, it is something that you can make your livelihood out of, and you just have to decide and stick with it through thick and thin.
Very, very sage advice, and I couldn't agree with you more on both of those points. To those hearing parents with deaf children, you know, you got to jump on that wagon right away. You know, the best time to learn a sign language was maybe 2-3 years ago. The second best time to learn sign language is right now.
Yeah.
And, you know, the longer you put that forward, you know, it's never too early to start learning, but it can be too late. So especially with your children, and this is something that it really gets to me because right now I have a 1.5-year-old daughter, and just to be able to have that communication with her as a toddler, and as she grows up to be able to have that avenue of communication is really important to me as a father. But also when I am an interpreter and I go into these elementary schools and I see these kindergartners that start with 0 language, and it really breaks my heart. And you know, there are they start the race so far behind. And you know, you take a hearing child, and on average, that 5-year-old child that starts kindergarten had been exposed to 30 million words. A deaf child, if their parents don't learn sign language, start with 0. And so they are starting so far behind, it can be, many times it's impossible to catch up. So I really would advocate and to really encourage anybody that has a deaf child to just start learning sign language now, because really, you know, you want to have that connection with your child, but you also want to do the best thing for your child, and you want to prepare them and give the tools and capabilities. Speaking of children.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you really quick about my nonprofit, just so you know. We have actually still getting. We have got incorporated, but we're waiting to hear back about the status. But it's ASL2, like I sign 2, right? And it is an avenue for parents of deaf children to be able to learn sign language for free online. If you know anybody who has a child who is hearing impaired, deaf, language delayed, we just need a cover sheet of their IEP. If they are preschool age, it doesn't matter. We'll just interview or talk, and we'll get you those free lessons so that we can get parents started now.
Yes,
okay?
Absolutely. And I want to thank you so much for everything that you do, for the 35 years of service that you provided to the deaf community, and just to be an advocate and to teach other sign language too. I remember reading that you were also a teacher, a sign language teacher, and to be able to give so much to the community. And you know, I personally want to thank you, because I know that is such there is so much time and energy and resources that go into not only learning the language, but then to interpret the language and then to teach the language, and now to set up the foundation to the nonprofit organization to really enable parents to the ability and the tools to do so free of charge. I mean, that is such a great thing that you're offering, and I would encourage any parents, just as you are saying, to really take advantage of that and to learn the language, not just for yourself but for your children. And that's something I really feel strongly about too.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. This has been a very nice discussion. I sure appreciate it.
Absolutely, I really appreciate it. So I really hope that you enjoyed that interview. It was definitely chock full of information. So I'm interested to hear from you. What was your biggest takeaway from the interview? Was it about how long it takes to learn the language? Or maybe it was about breaking through plateaus? Or was it more about interpreting? Or was it Sandi's advice for hearing parents with deaf children? I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. And also, are you just learning the language? Are you an interpreter? Or are you a parent that has a deaf child? Again, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, because really these videos are for you. So are you somebody that's just learning the language? Are you an interpreter? Or are you a parent that has a deaf child and you're trying to learn sign language? So let me know what kind of information that you're interested in learning. Do you want more lessons? Would you like more interviews? Would you like more insights on what the deaf community is like? So just let me know in the comments down below what you are most interested in learning next. And if you're interested in learning more about the courses and the nonprofit organization that Sandi is involved with, you can check it out at her website, itsasignlife.com. And if you're interested in learning more about sign language in general, or if you'd like more lessons, or even like some really great resources, you can check out our website at aslbasics.com. And if you're interested in supporting the channel so we can continue to produce lessons and do these interviews, you can do so through Patreon. I'll leave links for all of that in the description down below for Sandi's website, for our website, for Patreon. And also I'll include some great resources that can help with learning the language and also learning more about the deaf community. So I really recommend you check that stuff out. And if you found the interview helpful and you think it might encourage somebody else, especially if they're a parent and they have a deaf child, please feel free to share this video with them. And I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.
Accepting the least amount. The least amount. The least amount. The least amount of information.